What Strengths does is it's a simple assessment that people take that gives them really, for our students, their top 5 strengths out of 34, okay? And they fall under these different 4 domains that we talk about. But it gives us a picture of what's right with us, right? It gives us a picture of the way that we're naturally gifted. So think about if I've got 2 nursing majors here at Oklahoma Wesleyan, and one has incredible relational strengths, like they're really gifted like with the bedside manners and kind of being, and one is really good at the pharmacology and the treatment planning and kind of that more side of things. Which one is better? The reality is, right, neither of them necessarily. Right. What sets them apart is understanding the way that God has gifted them. And the one who has the high relational capacity will always be better playing to those strengths. And sure, she can learn the pharmacology, she can learn that, but her best version of her as a nurse is tapping into the way that she's naturally gifted. And the other is true as well. And that's the beauty of it. It's this kind of two-way street where I can recognize my own gifts and abilities, know that that's the way that God has wired me, become the best version of myself, but it liberates me to appreciate others instead of just being a little bit frustrated by them.
Welcome to BeyondU, a podcast from Oklahoma Wesleyan University about faith, culture, and higher education. And today we are with my friend, Ben Rotz. Ben is the director, or I don't know exactly what your title is, so help us out here.
My title is Associate VP for Student Development, which means I am the Dwight Schrute, essentially. I'm the assistant to the, right? So I'm Associate Vice President for Student Development.
Fair enough. And so tell us, for those that aren't familiar with higher education, just a little bit about like, what is student development? Just not to assume anything, but what is that?
Yeah, so student development, ironically, is about developing students.
Really?
So yeah, shockingly, right? So we do a lot of work outside the classroom, and so from activities to res life to even things like discipline, we're kind of the ones who help support the academic environment, and we also have all the fun.
Yeah, no, that's great. And so student development is definitely a central part of what we do here at Oklahoma Wesleyan. But your time here at OKWU actually goes beyond this role. And so tell us a little bit about how you first became familiar with OKWU, your time here, because Ben's also an alum.
I am, I was talking to one of my classes the other day, and I realized in talking with him, 25 years ago this fall, I moved in as a freshman. And when I said, I was just like, wait a second.
So that was just a couple years ago.
I know. Yeah, but I'm acutely aware that I'm no longer the cool guy. Not that I ever was, right? But nobody sees me as the cool young guy here on campus. So I came to OKWU in the fall of 1998.
Okay.
I grew up in Topeka, Kansas. And I graduated in 2002 with a degree in ministry.
Okay.
And then spent a few years in ministry and then came back here. And this is school year number 19.
Wow.
Back at OKWU, right?
Some of our students, our incoming students.
You don't have to remind me.
Okay, I'll leave that there. We'll let everyone else fill in the blanks there. So you're an alum, you're here, you're investing in OKWU still to this day, 25 years later. That's a huge investment, and certainly grateful for that.
I tell people this all the time. I believe in this place in part because of the influence it has had on me, for my 4 years here and then working here for several years. It's just a place that's been, continues to be incredibly transformative for me.
Well, and let's talk about that for a second, because it is a central part of your story. Thinking back to your time here as a student, what were some of those foundational experiences that you had? Like, can you think of one or maybe even a few just to kind of help us, get a picture of your time here?
Yeah, I'll give you a funny one, because we all have those stories. If anybody went to college, we all have those stories, right. So I don't remember which year it was, but for whatever reason, there was one year here, a fall, that we had just this mass migration of frogs on campus. It was like the plague. I mean, like they were everywhere.
Are they as bad as the grasshoppers that we've
seen? Worse. Yeah, it was worse. And as typical young college students do, we were just not the smartest people, but we thought it would be funny to, and I hope nobody's offended by this, but we actually got water balloon launchers.
Oh no!
Right? So we would gather up these frogs, and we would take these water balloon launchers, And then if you've been to campus before, we would stand in the tower of the mansion, and we could
No.
launch these things all the way up past the campus center. So
Oh
we would
no.
just yeah. So
For all the frog lovers out there, we're sorry.
apologies.
Yeah, we're
Yeah,
sorry. We probably should
yeah.
have given a little bit of a heads up on
Should
that,
have.
but that's okay. That's
Yep.
okay.
Yep.
So that's a more fun experience. Tell us about something maybe formational.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So my junior year, we decided, a few of us who were studying for ministry at the time, that every Sunday night we had a prayer chapel on campus where the carriage house is now, if you've been to campus before. And we would select one of us to give a sermon. And there weren't faculty there. There wasn't anybody else there. But we would, every Sunday evening, one of us would give a sermon, and then we would sit around and critique it. And it really, Tori, for me and for those of us, I think, in that room, a lot of whom are in local church ministry now, it was so formative because nobody was making us do it.
Right.
But we all recognized that we felt called to minister, called to preach, and it was about making us better and really kind of embracing the growing role and responsibility that we all had. But it was a safe environment to do
For
that,
sure.
right? Incredibly formative for me.
Well, and you think about an experience like that, and it kind of dovetails perfectly into our conversation today, because in some ways, I would imagine that environment on a Sunday night allowed you to see some of the strengths of, in your preaching, but also having others there. It kind of helps bring to the surface areas to work on. And that's the beautiful part of, I think this conversation that we're heading into today about why do strengths matter, and this kind of cultivating and understanding of like, how has God naturally gifted every person, and how can we as a Christian community really focus on engaging that for not only our students, but even those that we come in contact with beyond the four walls of Oklahoma
Absolutely.
Wesleyan. And that's kind of central to your role here at OKWU. So diving in really to kind of the essence of today's conversation, tell us a little bit more about the importance of the work of strengths and kind of helping people understand how God made them and why that's a good thing.
Yeah. I got exposed to strengths probably about 10 years ago. And not to nerd out too much, but strengths is based on this whole branch of what we call positive psychology.
Okay.
And, my master's degree is in psychology and counseling. And most of us, if not all of us, when we think about life, when we think about leadership, these different areas of life, we tend to approach it from sort of a weakness or deficit mind. So we're all aware of what's wrong with us. Like, we all have this voice in the back of our head that's like, well, and that voice can nag at us quite a bit. Excuse me. So one of the things that I notice a lot in the people that I work with is when we feel like we don't have enough, or we feel like we're not measuring up, we tend to gravitate towards this this tendency to start comparing ourselves to others, or maybe competing with others, right? To say, well, if I just had what Torrey had, or if I just had what Jim done, or we compete to say, well, if I could just be better at, then I would arrive, in life or in leadership.
Yeah. And we know that comparison game, that competition game, man, it's the thief of joy.
It is.
And it robs us of so much, I think, of personally, but even the corporate nature of what it means to be the body of Christ together when we're trying to compare.
Absolutely.
You're good at this, and I wish I was better at that. And so talk to us a little bit more about kind of the cultural component here at OKWU. How have you seen our emphasis and our kind of cultural awareness of strengths contribute to this almost more holistic appreciation for the body of Christ?
Yeah, I think that tendency to compare and compete, every one of us has it, right? We all play these games where we're, you and I our background is in the church world, and this tendency to say, well, if I could just get my church to X amount of people, or if we could just get this much share of the market, we would make it. I would arrive as a leader. And that really persists even for college students as well, as they're starting to ask these questions about who am I and what do I believe, and that tendency to compare and compete. What Strengths has done is give us language and a framework to help students and staff and faculty to understand the way that I believe God has gifted them and wired them, to learn to lean into that. Right? We'll talk about servant leadership maybe a little bit later in our time together. But understanding the way that we're wired, how can I leverage that to be the best version of me? But in doing so, also, how can I learn to appreciate others who might be different than me, right?
And that's, I think, the essence of why this conversation matters. And it's again, getting a little bit beyond ourselves in some ways. through understanding and appreciating how God made us. I feel like in today's culture, and it kind of varies with the generations, though, like there's different assessments that help us kind of understand our personalities. And I like to even say it helps me understand my quirks a little bit more. But what are some of the assessments that you've really leaned on in your own personal development? And then as you're even looking to help develop students, what are some of those official assessments that folks can kind of lean in and tap into?
Yeah, I've used several over the years. I'm certified with Strengths. That's one that I'm most comfortable with or familiar. But Enneagram is certainly out there right now. Myers-Briggs type indicator we use quite a bit, or we have used in the past. So those are some of them. And then the Berkman assessment would be some of those that are out there that I'm aware of, have used in the past, or taken myself, that we use quite a bit.
And here at OKWU, we really dive into the strengths. And so tell us, in case someone hasn't heard about that particular assessment, just give us kind of a 30,000-foot view. What is that assessment? We've kind of talked a little bit about it, but kind of the nuts and bolts and why it's so helpful.
Coming back to what we just talked about, again, what Strengths does is it's a simple assessment that people take that gives them, really, for our students, their top 5 strengths out of 34, okay? And they fall under these different 4 domains that we talk about. But it gives us a picture of what's right with us, right? It gives us a picture of the way that we're naturally gifted and wired. And so what Strengths does is it flips it from what's wrong with me and what do I need to improve on to what do I do naturally well. How can I become self-aware to manage my weaknesses or my blind spots? But it really helps us to focus our energy on the things that we do well. So I'll give you an example, Torrey, and you and I can even talk about this for you and I and the way that it's expressed itself. So think about it this way, right? So think about if I've got 2 nursing majors here at Oklahoma Wesleyan, and one has incredible relational strengths, like they're really gifted, like with the bedside manners and kind of being, and one is really good at the pharmacology and the treatment planning and kind of that more side of things. Which one is better? The reality is, right, neither of them necessarily.
Right.
What sets them apart is understanding the way that God has gifted them. And the one who has the high relational capacity will always be better playing to those strengths. And sure, she can learn the pharmacology.
For
She
sure.
can learn that.
For sure.
But her best version of her as a nurse is tapping into the way that she's
Right.
naturally gifted. And the other is true as well. Like we
Right.
can learn some of those relational gifts. So for you and I, Tori, we could even talk about, you and I have worked together now for 3 years
Yeah.
or so.
Yeah.
Okay. And you and I are similar in some ways,
sure.
but you and I are different in others, right?
Yeah.
So even for the listener, you may not be aware of this, but part of my job before was overseeing chapel, okay? And Tori, you came in and you were a part of things before that, and you have taken over chapel since then. And I have no problem telling you, and I've told a lot of people this, you're better at it than I am, right?
Which, can I just say, like, makes me super uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Like, if I'm being super honest.
But is it funny to you that it doesn't make me uncomfortable?
But I think my response, though, is a product of growing up in a culture that doesn't know how to really celebrate strengths.
Sure.
It's and maybe it's just the product of my own upbringing or product of the environment I grew up in, back home. But I happen to think that, like, as a society, we're so focused on the less positive side, the more negative, that hearing a positive remark almost is like, no, and we're quick to dismiss those things. So first of all, thank you. Thanks for making me uncomfortable there. But I think what you're communicating in the essence of just celebrating other strengths is so important, especially in the health and longevity of the body of Christ. Just celebrating the strengths of others. And that doesn't mean that any other's strengths are less than. They're so important.
Exactly.
Because, Ben, I could not do what you do.
Right.
And most days I wouldn't want to, knowing some of the...
Well, and that's the funny thing. The reason that I can tell you that with full confidence is I'm not comparing myself to you, or I'm not competing with you, which means that I have the freedom to appreciate you, right?
Yeah.
So I have no problem saying to you or anybody else that you're better at it than I do, because you and I are gifted differently, right?
And that's a good thing.
It is, right?
Yeah.
So we even talked, Tori, a little bit from a biblical perspective. Paul in 1 Corinthians 12 talks about this whole model for biblical community, this one body, many parts that a lot of us are aware of.
Right.
But before that, he talks about this rhythm in chapter 12, 4-6 of different and same, right?
Yeah.
And somehow that's supposed to be the way the body of Christ function, is we're different,
Right.
but we're the same. So you and I, we are gifted differently. We have different strengths, but we're a part of this team here at
For
Oak. We're
sure.
a part of the kingdom of God. And that sameness is what gives us the capacity to appreciate,
Yeah.
right? And to value the differences that we
That's
have.
so good. I remember the first time I took the StrengthsFinder assessment. I was a freshman in college. So this was like a decade ago, which makes me just sound and feel so old saying that out loud.
You're not old.
But I remember taking this assessment, and in this particular course, it was a course that every freshman had to take, or every new student actually. And I remember getting my results back and be like, ugh. Like it just, I don't know what I was expecting or hoping for, but I got it back. And I remember we had to write like a reflection paper, and my paper was it was a negative bent, like, why am I the way that I am? And I remember my professor, I'll never forget this conversation, pulled me aside and was like, it'll change your life if you can look at this as a good thing.
Yeah.
And it just is a conversation that has shaped so much of who I am. And that's the beautiful part, I think, about strengths that you speak to. Like, it's good.
Yeah. I think even of our team in student development, which is kind of where we started today, when we don't have a framework for navigating differences, it just leads to a lot of perpetual frustration, right? Personality conflicts. And our staff that I work in is different. Each personality is different. And is there friction or tension? Of course there is, right? Because that's just human nature. Yeah. But one of the things that Strengths and the framework has done is give us language for navigating differences where the differences between us, we've moved from frustration to appreciation, right? So we've got somebody on our staff that has what we call the futuristic strength. They're always pulling us. They're always about possibilities. They're always thinking about, well, what could be and what if we did this, which is great. They live in possibility land, right? So we have another staff member who has the strength of context, which means they're the ones who are always reminding us of the past. Like, don't forget about.
So they're looking in the rear view mirror while someone else is looking out the windshield.
So I've explained it this way: the one with futuristic is a map maker. The one with context is a map reader.
Oh, that's so good.
Does that make sense? Yeah. So both of them are gifted differently.
Yeah.
And they both see things differently. But what we've learned is, look, as a team, if we miss out on the one who is pulling us into the future, we miss something.
Right.
But the same is true if we don't pay attention to the one who is reminding us of the past, we miss something there. So whereas before there can be conflict and tension in any team, there still can be a healthy degree of conflict. But Strengths has given us the language to say, look, we need these different voices, as a part of our team to give us a more robust, well-rounded framework for what it is to function as a biblical team, the way God intends.
Yeah, and I love what you just said there. It's like this whole concept of missing out when we don't tap into our own strengths or even the strengths of others. Like, we miss out on the fullness of the experience of community that God, I think, has designed each of us for. And so it gives us this way to not only appreciate people, but to really tap into the fullness of the experience.
Yeah, and that's the beauty of it. It's this kind of two-way street where I can recognize my own gifts and abilities, know that that's the way that God has wired me, become the best version of myself.
Totally.
But it liberates me to appreciate others instead of just being a little bit frustrated by them.
And, kind of taking this into a more specific to Oklahoma Wesleyan, strengths being cultural for us, being important to us in conversations really from the gate with all of our students. Like, they're expected to take this assessment and kind of become a little bit more aware of who they are. We've even taken, I would say, a heightened awareness or a heightened intensity approach to this understanding of like developing the whole person. We talk about the whole person a lot here at the university, and we've done it through a new mechanism or a new approach called P.A.T.H. Mm-hmm. Let's kind of shift gears here for a moment and just talk a little bit about what is P.A.T.H. How is it helping kind of shape the student experience here at Oklahoma Wesleyan? Because this is new and kind of unique to us. So talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so this was really born. In fact, you and Jim hit on this in a podcast a couple episodes ago. I think one of the things that we've seen in higher education is this move towards a more transactional educational experience. And what I mean by that is, if we're not careful, we have this mentality of come to school, pay your tuition, get your grades. In exchange for that, we'll give you a degree and kind of wish you well.
I heard a former student today actually call her diploma her receipt.
Yeah.
She's like, I want my receipt.
Yeah. Yep. So the question that we started asking, not long ago is, well, not just about the finish line of graduation, but the
Right.
finish line of life. And
Mm.
how can we, as a higher education institution that's involved in culture and faith and all these different things,
Right.
how can we help shape this next generation, not just to get across the stage for graduation,
Right.
but how can we shape them to be disciples
Yeah.
10 years from now, spouses, parents, like employees, these different
Right.
things. So Path was really born out of our desire to invest in these students for the long haul. Not,
Mm.
we care about you, of course, while they're here on
For
campus,
sure.
but we want to see you thrive the way God intended 10 years, 15 years, 20, not just when you're a senior, but when you're a senior citizen. We want
For
to see you
for
continuing
sure.
to do well, right?
Well, and as students leave this place, they shift into now Oklahoma Wesleyan is their alma mater, and taking it back to the origin of that kind of word or that phrase, it's other mother, and it's this nurturing element that kind of is communicated in those words, and I think that this approach actually helps us fulfill what the true essence of alma mater means. Like it's to nurture beyond the point of walking across the stage, but to really carry them through life. And it's, I think one of the things that in my role that I so appreciate about this new approach to helping our students is that it shifts us from a place of surviving and just getting by to what does it look like to thrive, not just
Absolutely.
here at Oakwood, but even beyond. Talk to us a little bit about how, even in just this short time that Path has been in existence, how you've seen that shift take place, like from the hey, just getting by. Which I'll be honest, like sometimes that's what you gotta just
I still do that, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
Like today for me is like just survive and
Uh-huh.
advance, right? But how does it help us, or how have you seen it help us shift really from this survival mode to no, we're thriving?
Yeah, I'll go back to the acronym for PATH, which
Okay.
we haven't talked about yet. But the whole idea, Tori, is really about helping students to develop a life resume,
Right.
right? That extends beyond just their time of graduation. So the P is for preparedness.
Okay.
These are the things that we help students to really gather, like in classes, right? So if they
Yeah.
have a personal finance class about budgeting,
Right.
or if it's a New Testament about theology, or right. So that's the P. The A is about attitude, and this is where the strengths come in. It's really the self-awareness piece, helping
Mm-hmm.
our students to be aware of the way they're gifted,
Yeah.
to have we talk a lot here, and we'll talk more on campus about this kind of servant leadership mindset that we
Right.
have. The T is about transformation. I could walk you through so many stories of students who have come through these doors and through chapel or professors or different people. Their lives have been transformed by the grace and truth of Jesus
Yeah.
Christ. So that's
Yeah.
that transformation piece. And then the hands-on, the H, is these different things that students pick up on, right, from time to time. Maybe they play a sport here that we wouldn't necessarily think that that's a part of our resume, our life resume,
Right.
but it shapes us. I mean, I could talk about
Absolutely
my
does.
golf coach when I was here, 25 years ago, and the influence they still have on my
Yeah.
life. So these different things that shape us, and so it's really about helping students to build these things, but to leverage them towards a servant leadership mindset when they leave here, that they are aware of how they're gifted, they're aware of the things that they have to offer, and they have a passion for leveraging those in service to the kingdom of God,
Yeah.
after they graduate.
And it's a holistic approach, right? So it's not just focusing on one area of life. And I think that that's something that I've really come to appreciate about this kind of new emphasis with Path. Do you have any experience thus far since Path's, existence has been in motion, which hasn't been all that long, but
Mhm.
a story and experience thus far that really stands out to you is like, no, this is why we do what we do.
Yeah, I mean, a couple that I can stand out, and I won't use names, right, to
For sure.
protect, right? But I think of a student that I worked with in not long ago who came to Oklahoma Wesleyan as a first generation college student, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what I mean by that is college wasn't necessarily on the highest list of
Right.
priorities, right, for their family.
Right.
And this student has moved from a place of uncertainty
Mm-hmm.
about education to a passion for going on to pharmacy school,
Wow.
right, someday, because of their ability to become more aware of their giftedness, their desire to help provide healing,
Yeah.
right? So think about that connection with
Yeah.
pharmacy school and being able to provide healing and wholeness for people. So it's just been really neat to kind of see them through this path process,
For
to
sure.
recognize, embrace, from being skeptical about
Mm.
school, to being transformed, and now having a vision for
Yeah.
the mission of their life that really kind of fits in with the kingdom of God, right?
Right.
So I could tell more stories, but that's
No
one that I
doubt.
think is really, really neat.
Well, and that I think is so important because, that the idea of like living out that calling that God has on that, particular student's life. Man, in higher ed, the tendency and propensity, at least from what I've experienced, is sometimes we can get so caught up in the talking of the theory and the idea of these things. And sometimes it's the execution and the practical and the living it out where that can sometimes get lost in translation. Not always. And not only here, just at Oklahoma Wesleyan, right? Like
Sure.
this is just kind
Yep.
of one of the tendencies of higher ed. And so how does Path and its functions help us really be positioned to make this a practical approach for our students, not just a theoretical, like, hey, one day you'll get there, but hey, it's here, it's now. Let's just do this.
Yeah, that's a great question. So really the nucleus of this whole path thing, it's all encompassing for us in student
Mm-hmm.
development. And I think the university really is embracing it at large. But the core of it is what we call path coaching,
Yeah.
right? So I'm certified as a Gallup Strengths coach. We have another person who's certified as well. So what we offer is the chance for students to schedule a simple appointment with one of our path coaches where they can come in, we can talk strengths,
Yeah.
right? We can play that. We can talk about life and school and these different
Yeah.
things. But that's where the rubber meets the road. It's these conversations and these coaching environment. One of the beautiful things is it's free
Yeah.
to college students, whereas and maybe some of our listeners, but to pay for coaching can get a little bit pricey.
Yeah.
But to have strength certified coaching here that's just accessible to students, it's free. That's really kind of where the rubber meets the road for us,
sure.
where students can come in and they don't have to pay any money. We can talk strengths. They all take their strengths assessment as freshmen here anyway. And it gives us a chance to kind of springboard into these other conversations about life and servant
Yeah.
leadership and gifting and calling, all these different things. It's really, really fun to be part of.
Absolutely. Before I was in the role that I'm in now as university pastor, I was an admissions counselor. And whenever I give like tours on campus, we'd always talk about the free things that are included. And so I would always tell people like they're free, wink, wink, nod, nod. They're actually something you're paying for. You should use it. And
Yeah.
so in my encouragement to anyone that's listening, that's a student at Oklahoma Wesleyan, whether it's traditional or even a graduate and professional studies student, like this is something that's already baked into what your experience is here. Use it, leverage it, because it really is for the good of not just the individual, but
Sure.
this, I think if in getting this right, this element of the transformation, this has the power and capability of transforming entire communities.
It does. Yeah.
In a very real and practical
Yeah,
way. And
yeah.
so I always tell people, even if it's free, like dive into
Absolutely.
it.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things, Tori, you and I have even talked about that I think one of the things that makes OKWU unique and positions ourselves, with this whole conversation of strengths and development is you and I both get a lot of calls from people like, hey, do you know anybody that you can hire for
all the time.
right? Which
Yeah.
we get those questions all the time. But I think what makes PATH so important in this discussion is college degrees. A lot of people have them, right?
For sure.
But the question that I get a lot from people who are calling about, hey, do you know any, can I hire? Do you have anybody? One of the questions I get most often is, are they self-aware? Do they know how to be a part of a team?
Right.
Right? Because it's not something that a lot of this next generation is taught a lot.
Yeah.
And so if we can help students here to say, look, I know the way that I'm gifted.
Right.
I know what I'm getting a degree in. I know how to be a part of a team and appreciate
Right.
others, and that we're different. And I know how to offer what I have towards something bigger than me in the kingdom of God. Think about the impact that can have for our
sure.
graduates, but also for the churches or the schools or the companies that are hiring these graduates who have an awareness of, their giftingness and how God has designed them to flourish and thrive.
When I think back to a previous episode that Jim had with Dr. Enzer here on campus, and one of the parts in a totally different conversation that they were having, but one of the parts that they talked about was how generations are quick to dismiss other generations, and older generations kind of sometimes have a quick tendency to dismiss Gen Z. Like they don't care, they don't show up, like all the negative tones and points of conversation. But I would actually argue that this this concept of path has been received quite well, in the sense that Gen Z actually wants to lean into their strengths.
Oh, no question.
They want to lean into, okay, how has God gifted me? And honestly, it all circles around the conversation point of influence, right? How are you going to maximize your influence if you don't know who you are? And so while we sometimes can, as a society, and I would even say the church, to dismiss Gen Z, like these folks are actually kind of on the front end, the front leading edge of self-discovery in a good, healthy way, sometimes, but not always, you know? But I think that this generation has a lot to teach us about leaning into our strengths and being developed, being willing to be taught and to be coached in the sense of, in this path coaching. And I think that Gen Z is proving to us that this concept of path is so needed and is so helpful. How have you seen this generation, just again, and since path has started, really take this idea and run with it and using it for their own good, but using it also for the good of others?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. One of the conversations that I had with our students the other day in one of my classes was the differences generationally, theologically, right? So, and what that meant in the context was that I think this generation, for maybe an older generation, that this assent to propositions of believing all the right things, which matters tremendously, right? It matters tremendously. This generation cares about those things, but they also care about each other, and they care about making a difference in the world, and they care about, not that the older generation doesn't, but I think there's a whole new wave of students and this next generation of leaders who they really want to lean into the way, how has God wired me? How can I be a part of something that's bigger than myself? How can we actually make a difference in the world? And that's just what I love about Path and what it has to offer, is being involved in those kinds of conversations that I think are significant for the future.
I know Jim, our president, Jim Dunn, also co-host of this podcast, talks often to our students and to prospective students, just sharing with them, like, listen, none of us that work here at the university would be in the role that we are in if we didn't believe in you. We didn't believe in your generation. And I love what the points that he goes on to make in that conversation, is just this, like, if you get right with Jesus, because that's most important. Like, if you don't get right with Jesus, like that, it kind of leaves a lot of other things to chance. But if you get right with Jesus and then you take the compassion that is compassion's not new, right? But it is, in a way, very unique to this generation, Gen Z, and generations coming after it. Like, their compassion for their fellow human it's different than my generation.
Sure, absolutely.
And that's a good thing. But if you can take a love for Jesus with the compassion that you have, you'll change the world. You will change the world. And I think one of the beautiful parts of Path is that it exists to help facilitate that world change. Like, we just want to help you be or discover and then become all that God has called you to be.
Yeah, I think that's a lot of the heart behind what we're doing.
For sure. And again, the impact goes far and wide, which I think kind of dovetails into this conversation of servant leadership, because part of it, for students to go out and to make a difference in this world, it's important that they know who they are. It's important that they know whose they are. And I would even go a step further to say it's important to know what it looks like to be a transformational leader, which Jesus shows us exactly what that looks like. And I think of even Philippians 2, where it's talking about imitating Christ's humility, which is such a key component of servant leadership. But servant leadership is not a new topic of conversation even here at Oklahoma Wesleyan, and it's definitely not a unique to us sort of conversation. But why is it important to send out servant leaders rather than just any generic kind of leader?
Yeah, I think, I'm trying to think of the best way to answer this question. I think we don't lack for people in our culture and society who are clamoring for power.
Right.
And I think the assumption for so long has been that we have to grasp and grab power to change. And I think that goes exactly back to the Philippians 2 passage, right, where Paul talks about, like, have the very same mind of Christ, who, being in very nature God, did not consider equality to be something, but he says became nothing, like giving himself away. And I think for these students, I think they've seen some of the devastating effects that
Mm.
the thirst for power has, and has wreaked on society. And I think they want something different, right?
Mm.
So when they can recognize the way that God has gifted them, that they are created in the image of God, and so is everybody else around them,
Right.
right? Which is part of the discussion as well. And when they can lean into that servant mentality of the humility, modeling the humility of Christ, but really trying to serve the people around them, um, they have seen it and they have hope that it can make all the difference in society. So it's gifting, yes, like it's
For sure.
stewarding the way that we're wired, but it's doing so to serve with grace and truth and compassion the world around us, right? And I
Right.
think that's why I love this generation.
Yeah. And their heart is just, it's unmatched, right? But
Yeah.
it's that, I think, again, part of Path is teaching that grace and truth concept, which we talk a lot about here at OKWU. Like it's not either or, it's both and.
Yep,
And
absolutely.
so let's just talk to the people that are thinking about, either they themselves coming to OKWU or college in general, or maybe they've got a kid that they're looking to send to college. When you think about making a decision on where to go to school, how can parents, let's talk just specifically parents, how can they help their students navigate some of the realities
Yeah, that's a great question.
in this decision of like, where do I go to school? Because I kind of diving back to an earlier point, you can go anywhere and get a degree. You can go anywhere and get an education. And honestly, most places are very similar because there's standards that you have to follow. But what would you say when you're looking at the things that really help someone become a whole person? What advice would you give parents as they're helping their students navigate?
Oh, that's a great question. I've worked with a lot of parents over the years, and I don't think that I've given perfect advice every time. But I think one of the things, Tori, I would say is when I talk to parents about sending their student, their son or daughter, off to college, right? We tend to kind of view it almost as this cliff.
Yeah.
Where we send them off to college and then we never see them, we never talk to them again, like they're on their own. It's simply, not true, right? So I think one of the things I would say to parents who are taking their son or daughter to college or who have a college student is college means change.
Right.
It doesn't mean the end,
Right.
right? So even for, on a personal level, my wife and I, we have 2 kids, Piper and Jack, we love,
They're
with our
the
whole
cutest,
hearts.
by the way.
Well, they look like their mother. That's why, right? But before we had kids, it was like Sarah and I, we loved being together. Like it was awesome. And then Piper came along, and it wasn't the end. It was a change, right? And it required us to renegotiate. What does it mean to be husband and wife now that we've got a third party in the picture, right? And then Jack comes along, and I would say it's similar, different, but that it's a change. It's not the end, and it requires just a renegotiation of the terms of being a parent and a son or daughter, right? So one of those things might be talking about intentionally, okay, this change is coming or it's here.
Right.
How can we work together to navigate this, right? How can we work together to put a plan together for communication? Maybe that means for parents being able to put the ball in the student's court to say, hey, why don't you reach out more often, right? And for the parents to kind of not exit, stage left, but maybe to let the student drive some of that. So I think that's what I would say is intentionally renegotiating and just embracing the fact that this is a season of life that's a change, but not the end, right?
And with that, there's a choice to either embrace the change or to resist it. The change is the inevitable. Like you just can't avoid it altogether. And so when we think about the development of students, it's important to embrace that so as to not hold back when we're thinking about cultivating and developing their God-given potential. I would say it's important as parents and even other supporting roles in students' lives, like to embrace that change. It's a good thing.
Absolutely.
I mean, have you seen it even in your own life? Like how you and your family back when you came here to OKWU, how many years ago did you say? 25?
25.
That's okay. 25.
How old are you, by the way?
I'm
want to talk about
29.
that. Okay.
I'm 29.
All right, so you were 4 when I was
I was preschool,
Yeah.
but that's okay.
That's okay.
But like when you think about even that season of change in your family dynamic, like how did you see how your parents navigated that change? How did that set you up for where you are today?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one of the things I would say is I didn't have cell phone,
Yeah.
right? So 25 years ago, think about
Yeah.
that. Like so my parents, who are incredible people, a lot of
They are
you know
indeed. Yeah.
my parents, they're wonderful people. It was a shift to when I came to school to say, not Ben, you're on your own, but this is the next step in your journey.
Right.
And your mom and I are still here for you, but
Right.
it looks different now
Right.
than it did a year ago, right? And even some of those conversations where they had to say, we don't want you coming over every weekend.
Right.
But, and I wouldn't have,
Right.
but it was just those kind of nudges that got me, kind of on the right path, no pun intended.
Yeah.
To just, because that's what college is they're not, for the traditional age, they're not fully adults yet, they're becoming.
Right.
And I think those are intentional steps that parents out there or guardians can make to just help nudge their students the right direction.
For
I
sure.
think matter, right? So it doesn't mean that you need to text your son and daughter after every class
Right.
to say.
And some parents do, so
Some
stop.
parents do,
Stop
right?
that. Yeah.
But it's just these intentional things that we do to,
Yeah.
what's the next step?
Yeah.
What's the next step? What's the right?
For sure.
And that's, I think, and this is why, again, coming full circle, why P.A.T.H can help in that, is because it helps us to just aid in that process.
For
I
sure.
think one of the things that we talk about at Oklahoma Wesleyan is we really believe fundamentally here in partnering with parents for the betterment of their
Yes.
students, right?
Yes.
So it's not here that we say, look, drop them off. They'll see you at Christmas.
Right. Good luck, Godspeed.
Right? Yep.
Yeah.
But we really believe in partnering with parents to
For
help
sure.
in this process of
For sure.
working with these young adults and future leaders to grow up.
And we don't take that partnership lightly
Absolutely
either.
not,
I mean, in all reality, you've put in 18 years on average of developing your student. And then all of a sudden, you turn the keys over in some ways. And not stepping out of their life completely, but it's a big deal where you send your kid to school, because in many ways, to use the words that you use, it's a partnership. And it has to be a partnership. And not every place is going to partner with you equally. And I would say that if I could plug OKWU for just a moment here, I think that that's one area that we do really well, is just the ongoing partnership. And hey, the first 18 years of your life, we will never tell you, just scratch that. Let's try something new. I can speak from even my own family's experience. Like I'm the youngest of 3, and I know one of my siblings went to a place that literally the first day of my sister's college career, she was in a class that said the very first thing was this: everything mom and dad taught you, throw it out the window.
Yeah, that's so unfortunate.
It is, and I think the older I get, the more I understand the heart of maybe a little bit of what they were trying to, I think that there was a poor execution on what they were trying to communicate, but and really becoming her own self, we see it as truly a partnership, and I think that that's probably one of the things that kind of sets OKWU apart in many ways, in a good way, that we want to build on those good things and help students to really thrive.
Yeah, I see OKWU as a bridge, sometimes, Torrey,
Yeah.
right? So students who come in and maybe they, again, we want to partner with parents for the betterment of students,
For
but we
sure.
then after they graduate to send them out, right,
For
on
sure.
mission. It becomes this kind of cycle that we
Yep.
have here at OKWU that
sure.
I think is really, really powerful and important.
They don't stay students forever.
Yeah.
And if you spend any time with us here at OKWU, you hear the language of be one sent.
That's right. We talk about it a lot.
Meaning, don't be one stay, be one sent.
Yep.
Go from this place and go make a difference in this world.
Yeah.
Ben, thank you. Thanks for this
Absolutely.
conversation.
Yeah, thanks for the
today.
time.
Yeah, absolutely. We like to end all of our conversations with a bit of a rapid fire
All right.
round.
Okay, we can do that.
So just going to throw some questions at you. They have nothing to do with our conversation today, but just helps us get to know Ben a little bit more. And so just random questions. You ready?
I'm ready. Bring it on.
Favorite sports team?
I'm a Kansas guy. Grew up in
Okay.
Kansas, so
Okay.
Rock Chalk forever, right? So
No K-State?
No K. I mean,
It's okay.
I like K-State.
It's okay.
But I'm a Jayhawk at heart. So anytime I can get to Lawrence for a basketball
Yeah.
game, I'm there.
Yeah, Rock Chalk Jayhawk. Are
That's
you a
right.
Chiefs fan?
I am a Chiefs fan.
Will you admit that you're a Royals fan, or are you not?
Well, you and I have talked about this story. I am a Royals fan by default,
Right.
but my wife's family's from Chicago, so I've kind of been grafted into the Cubs family.
You've been redeemed.
I
I
have
am
been-
a Cubs
yeah,
fan,
yeah.
so it doesn't feel
Yep.
very redemptive
Yeah.
these days, though. So
Go Cubs,
they're
go.
they're on the north side. They need to get it
That's
figured
right.
out. That aside, greatest athlete of all time.
Unquestionably Michael Jordan, right?
Okay.
So I
Okay.
talk about this. Is it LeBron? Is it Michael Jordan? And the difference for me is this. I think LeBron is the greatest athlete of all time.
Okay,
I mean, the guy, he just
he's just different. Yeah,
but when you talk about the competition and the competitor, like
MJ,
I think
all the way.
MJ takes it to a different level. So
I-
I like both, and that's
I'm with
obviously
you.
basketball, but yeah, Michael Jordan.
Well, that's good. Let's maybe shift gears from
Okay.
athletics for a moment. Best book you've read this year?
Best book I've read this year. It's actually one that has its roots in our area. So
Okay.
I read The Killers of the Flower Moon.
Oh, hey, there we go.
And this last year, which has to do with the Osage Native American population
Yeah.
in the 1920s, and it's kind of their saga. In fact, there's a movie coming out, I
Mhm.
think in October.
Yeah.
But a phenomenal book on even some of the history around where you and I
Yeah.
call home.
So for those of you that aren't aware of where Bartlesville, Oklahoma is, we share kind of a rich area of history here, and Ben's kind of talking about it. But go look up Killers of the Flower Moon. It's kind of honestly a very sad and very dark story, but we border a lot of history here in
Yeah.
Bartlesville.
Well, and part of the story is, when they shot the movie, like Leonardo DiCaprio lived like down the street, I
Right.
think, didn't he? So like there was this
Right.
whole kind of weird vibe where we had
Yeah.
even some of these people that were around
We
Bartlesville
had
for a while.
Martin Scorsese inside our mansion here on campus, our administrative building, and even one of our teammates was filming a video with him on a different project for Scorsese. And I remember I was watching Netflix one day and watching a documentary, not looking for anything related, obviously, to Oklahoma Wesleyan. And I remember seeing a scene. I was like, wait a second, I know that building. And it was actually the scene that was filmed inside the
That's
mansion
funny.
here at OKWU.
Yeah.
So,
It's funny because and I've lived in Bartlesville for a while, but we've shot like a couple major motion pictures here. I met Ben Affleck in the deodorant section at my grocery store. Like I was standing there,
Yeah.
and there's this like 6'6" dude, and I look over and it's Ben Affleck.
That's
and
amazing.
So like,
yeah,
you never know who in Bartlesville you're gonna run
it's kind
to.
of like Hollywood, Oklahoma here
Yeah,
in some
basically.
ways.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ben, seriously, thank you so
Absolutely.
much,
My
friend.
pleasure. Thank you,
Such
Torrey.
a joy. Thanks for joining us on this conversation today of BeyondU, a conversation for faith, culture, and higher education.